When adding and subtracting fractions, you need to make sure that the fractions have the same denominator. So in this case, we have 5 over 8 minus 3 over 5. We need to make sure that these numbers at the bottom of each fraction, we need to make sure that they're the same. To turn the 8 and the 5 into the same number, what we need to do is basically count by values of 8. So I'm literally going to start at 0 and I'm going to count by 8. So 0, 8, 16, 24, 32, and 40. Now I'm going to start at the number 5 and I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to count by 0. I'm start at 0 and I'm going to count by 5. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and we go a little further, and then 35, 40. So I made a list of multiples of 8 up here and a list of multiples of 5 at the bottom. I need to look for a number that's present in both of these lists of numbers. So if I go through these, excluding the 0, the only number that's shared between these two lists is this 40. What that means is I need to turn both this 8 and this 5 into the number 40. Now the question is, how do I do that? What can we multiply 8 by to turn it into 40? We can multiply 8 by 5, because 8 times 5 would give us 40. Now, because we're changing a fraction, because we're changing the denominator of this fraction, we need to multiply the top by that same value. So if I'm multiplying the 8 by 5 to turn it into 40, I'm going to multiply the 5 by 5 as well. For the other fraction, I'm basically going to do the same thing. Right now we have a 5 and we need to turn it into a 40. What do I multiply 5 by to turn it into 40? I need to multiply it by 8. So I'm going to do the exact same thing to the numerator. I'm going to multiply it by 8. So the next step that we need to do is actually do the multiplication. So right here we have 5 times 5 in the numerator, and that would give us a 25. In the denominator we have 8 times 5, which is 40. This fraction replaces this original expression that we had. We still have a minus sign, so I'm going to copy down the minus sign here. Now I'm going to do the multiplication for the other fraction. 3 times 8 is 24. 5 times 8 is 40, so we get 24 over 40. At this point, notice that both of our fractions have the same denominator, which is what we want. Now we can actually do the addition or subtraction, and in this case they want us to subtract the numbers. So the way adding and subtracting fractions work is this denominator is going to stay as part of the answer. So the 40 is going to stay the same. But we're going to actually subtract, in this case, we're going to subtract the numerators. We're going to do 25 minus 24, and that gives me a 1. So the answer to this problem is actually just 1 over 40. For this problem, we have 3 over 10 plus 3 over 4. So when we're adding and subtracting, we need to make sure that we have the same denominator and common denominator. What that means is I need to turn this 10 and this 4 into the same number. Now the number that we choose depends on their lowest common multiple. So what we do is we're going to make a list of numbers. First I'm going to count by tens. I'm going to start at 0 and just count 10, 20, 30, and 40. This should be enough numbers. Then I'm going to start at 4 and I'm going to count by 4s. So let me start at 0 and count by 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24. And that should be enough numbers. So now I need to look for what number is shared between these two values. In these two lists of numbers that we made, we want to choose the lowest number that's shared on both the top list and the bottom list. And that number would end up being the number 20. So what we want to do is we want to turn this 10 into a 20 and we want to turn this 4 into a 20. So what can I multiply 10 by to turn it into a 20? Well, we multiply it by 2 because 10 times 2 would be 20. But because we're changing this fraction, we're changing the denominator, we need to do the exact same thing to the numerator. We need to multiply it by 2 as well. For the second fraction, we're going to go through the same process. How do I turn that 4 into a 20? Well, we need to multiply it by 5. So I'm going to multiply the top by 5 as well. Now we need to do the actual multiplication. For this first fraction, 3 times 2 is 6, and 10 times 2 is 20. So we get a fraction of 6 over 20. We have a plus sign for this problem because we're going to be adding. So I copy down the plus sign and then I move on to the multiplication on the right. 3 times 5 is 15. 4 times 5 is 20. So we end up getting 6 over 20 plus 15 over 20. When we add and subtract fractions, we keep the denominator. We're not really going to do 20 plus 20. We're just going to copy down 20. That's going to be my denominator. But for the numerator, we need to do 6 plus 15. And 6 plus 15 ends up giving me 21. So the answer to this problem would be 21 over 20. For this problem, we have 6 over 7 plus 3 over 4. And again, because we're adding and subtracting fractions, we need to make sure we have the same denominator. So I'm going to make a list of numbers in which I count by 7s, and then I'm going to make another list that counts by 4s. So if I'm counting by 7, we'll count 0, 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, and I'll do one more. That would be 42. So these are your multiples of 7. Now I'm going to make my multiples of 4. 0, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, and 28. Okay, so now I need to look for what number is shared between these two lists. Now I notice that 28 is shared between both of these, and I believe that's the only value there. So 28 is the number that we want to turn both the 7 and the 4 into. How do I turn the 7 into a 28? I need to multiply it by 4. So I need to do the same thing to the numerator. How do I turn the 4 into a 28? I turn the 4 into a 28 by multiplying it by 7. So what I do to the denominator, I do to the numerator. So I have my setup. Now I just need to multiply these fractions together. 6 times 4 is 24. 7 times 4 is 28. So we end up turning this 6 over 7 into a 24 over 28. We have a plus sign, so I'm just copying that down. And then we need to do this fraction. 3 times 7 is 21. 4 times 7 is 28. We're adding the numbers together. So our answer is going to have a 28 in the denominator, just because that's how it works when you're adding and subtracting. We keep the denominator the same. But for the numerator, we need to add the numbers together. So 24 plus 21, that would be 45. I don't believe we can simplify this fraction anymore, so this would be the answer to the problem. For this problem, we have 5 over 8 minus 7 over 12. We need to find a common denominator, so I'm going to do what I've done in the previous examples. First, I'm going to count by 8s, and then I'm going to count by 12s. So I'll start at 0, and then I'm going to count by 8s. So my multiples of 8 are 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, and I'll do one more, 48. So those are my multiples of 8. My multiples of 12 would be 0, 12, 24, 36, and 48. I could keep going, but that should be enough numbers. So now I need to look for the lowest number that's shared between both this top list and this bottom list. So there's two values that are shared. There's a 24 and a 48. But because we're finding the least common denominator, we want to go with the lowest possible value that's shared between the two multiples. So we're actually going to go with 24 in this one. So just like the other problems, I need to turn the 8 into a 24 somehow. What can I multiply 8 by to turn it into a 24? We would have to multiply it by 3. So I'm going to multiply the numerator by 3 as well. For the other fraction, we need to turn a 12 into a 24, and we do that by multiplying it by 2. So we multiply the numerator by 2 as well. The next step in the problem is to actually do the multiplication. So for this first fraction, we have 5 times 3, which is 15, over 8 times 3, which is 24. So that's my first fraction, rewritten. We have a minus sign, so I'm going to go ahead and copy down the minus sign. Now I'm going to multiply 7 times 2, which is 14, and 12 times 2, which is 24. So now we can copy down the denominator. It's going to be a 24. And we can do the subtraction in this case, 15 minus 14. That would be a 1. So we end up getting 1 over 24. For this problem, we have 9 over 10 plus 7 over 8. Just like the others, we need to make sure that these denominators are the same before we can add or subtract the numbers. So I'm going to start counting. I'm going to find my multiples of 10, which would be 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on. So those are my multiples of 10. And if I count my multiples of 8, 0, 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, and so on. Now we need to look for the common multiples. So what number do we see on the top list and we also see at the bottom list? That would be the number 40. So I want to turn both the 10 and the 8 into a 40. How do I turn the 10 into a 40? I need to multiply it by 4. So I need to do that to the top as well, multiply it by 4. For the other fraction, we need to take 8 and multiply it by 5. So we're going to take 7 and also multiply it by 5. So now I need to multiply the numbers together. 9 times 4 would give us 36. 10 times 4 would give us 40. So our first fraction becomes 36 over 40. We have a plus sign, so I copy that down. And for my next fraction, 7 times 5 is 35. 8 times 5 is 40. So we have the same denominator, which means we can go ahead and add the numerators together. Our denominator is going to stay a 40, but for our numerators, we need to multiply 36, or we need to add 36 plus 35, and that would be 71. So we have 71. I don't believe we can simplify this, so this would be our final answer.